Welcome back to r/Neighbors from Hell, where people share stories about their crazy neighbors. And if you are new to my channel, please don't forget to subscribe to join our amazing community. And without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. And the first one is titled U-Turn Over My Lawn, Enjoy the Boulders and the Changes to Your Car's Suspension, Exhaust, etc. I used to live in a modular housing community, aka trailer park, that was basically a quiet retirement community with little traffic, crime or animosity between neighbors. Good ownership and management kept it that way, and everyone was happy living there. The police would occasionally cruise through, but only because they enjoyed spending some quiet time in an area of town that was not riddled with crime. It was a break for them, and we enjoyed having them there mostly to talk baseball and exchange jokes with. Within a couple of years though, the community was sold to a new owner and management company, and they basically let anyone who could pay the lot rent in without any vetting to keep the unruly out. The place went to hell within 3 months, with loud parties at night and plenty of crime, with the police there literally every night shutting down parties, arresting drug dealers, investigating break-ins and such. I lived at a space that was located at the top of where 2 roads connected to form a T dead-ended intersection, and one of our new tenants liked to drive their ridiculously lowered vehicle with an exhaust system that amplified the engine noise to its loudest through the park late at night and do a nightly U-turn over my lawn and driveway. Then they could head back down the road they just came up, I am guessing primarily to double the noise in the neighborhood while avoiding to turn too sharply with their modified suspension by driving over my lawn. This repeatedly happened, and sometimes the tire tracks were as much as 3 to 4 feet over the road into my lawn and across my driveway. The lawn actually belonged to the park, but it was my contractual responsibility to keep the lawn and the rest of the property looking nice. So naturally I was PO'd at having to repeatedly fix my lawn because the jerk down the street enjoyed driving on it and tearing it up. I went to the park's new management, complained about the damage the new neighbors were doing to my lawn, and got the typical trifecta response. First, we don't care because it is really park property and you still have to maintain it. Number 2, we don't care because we want the increased lot revenue from the new tenants more, and third, stop being a Karen and suck it up and shut up because we don't care since you are on an old contract at a low fixed rental rate that we cannot legally jack up through the roof. Now the pro-revenge part. I reread my contract closely to make sure I was within my tenants' rights relating to temporary landscape improvements, and went to the river to find 2 large, smooth river rocks that had just the right shape and weight as temporary landscape improvements, 4 to 6 inches high and weighed at least 25 pounds each. After a couple of hours I found just the right ones, hauled them home and painted them green to match the lawn, painted some decorative flowers on the sides and plopped one down in each corner of my lawn and driveway. We shall say purely for aesthetic enhancement, e.g. About 2 in the morning that night I could hear the jerk with the super loud exhaust pipe on his car with the ridiculously lowered suspension coming down the road to perform his usual U-turn over my lawn. I sat in my darkened house watching with glee as he ran up over the rocks, got high-centered and had to jack up the car to get the rocks out from underneath. They also knocked his suspension loose with one front tire aiming off in a slightly different direction than the other, and completely detached the super loud exhaust pipe that the jerk had to chuck into the back seat of his car. The best part was watching him slowly limp his now very quiet but squirrely steering car back down the road the direction it came from. The next day in the afternoon, surprisingly, the park manager knocked on my door and said they had received a complaint that I had damaged another tenant's vehicle by placing rocks in the road and wanted an explanation. I grabbed my park contract and showed them my new decorative landscape enhancements placed fully within the boundaries of my lawn. I made it a sickeningly repetitive point to make sure the park manager saw both the tire tracks and the resulting damage to my lawn, the scratch scratches the undercarriage did to my new decorative rocks, and the section in my contract regarding temporary landscape improvements, and I explained the rocks were there to stay until I got eviction papers. I never heard super loud pipes or from the manager again, and my lawn remained perfect after that. And guys, I'm wondering, did you ever have any neighbors that tried to mess with your garden or your lawn? How did you deal with these people? Let us know in the comments. And the next one is titled, "My neighbor's apartment got screwed the week I moved out." Backstory: I had this neighbor in the flat below mine that moved in right around the same time I did. Originally his apartment was for sale and I was renting mine in the building above. When he first moved in, he left a note for the entire building that he was doing some renovations and may be allowed for a bit. It was pretty inconvenient considering a stay-at-home order had just been issued for the first time in our country, but I decided the better move was just to wait a month or two for him to get settled and not say anything. Well, time went on, he had successfully torn out all his walls, ceiling and flooring. The whole process was incredibly loud with him banging, drilling and playing loud music while doing so every day, and once everything had been torn out, I had assumed he would get to fixing it immediately. This did not happen. Apparently he liked driving like he was in a slum. He would play his speakers every day, so I definitely knew he was home. He would throw parties, which was definitely illegal at the time. He and his friends would scream and play music until 3 to 4 AM every day, regardless of the day of the week. Obviously at this point I was sick of it because I am forced to be at home and I cannot concentrate or sleep with all of this going on. So I kindly write him a note asking if he could maybe keep it down, as I cannot do anything to get away from him and his noise right now. He seemed nice about it and said that he would be fixing the walls and ceiling soon. I did not see any reason at the time to push the issue further, but no more than a week after we spoke, he went back to his old BS, of course. At this point I tried to contact my landlord and see if she was willing to do something about this, because my apartment was pretty much unlivable during quarantine. At this point I had been losing my mind for months by now. She said she did not rent to him, which was a moment. His mom bought the apartment for him and said there is nothing she could do, so I tried to give it another whirl with coming to an agreement with my neighbor. This time I had specific terms, such as the request to only play loud music from 8 AM and no later than 23 o'clock on weekdays. If he is gonna have a party, it would be nice if he told me beforehand so I know if it is a day before an exam, for example. This was a very reasonable ask at the time, because legally he wasn't even allowed to have more than one person over at a time due to the virus restrictions. To this he basically told me to sit on a cactus and that he didn't want to go by arbitrary rules. Some months pass and I find an absolute gem of a new apartment both my boyfriend and I can officially live in. The bonus was that it was in a prime location for $450 less per month than I was already paying. So I cancel my lease, 30-day notice, etc., and my boyfriend and I start moving into the new place immediately. Well, during the time I was moving places, there was a giant freeze in my country. Nobody was prepared because it never snows here anymore. One Friday evening, a couple days after it started freezing, I get a call from my neighbor at my old place asking if I am home. I say no. I started moving into a new place a few weeks back. Apparently one of the pipes had frozen in my old studio and had created a massive leak in his. Despite having had a few drinks before taking the call, I kept my composure and said, well, that is unfortunate. I will take a look at the old place tomorrow when I have the time. Then I laughed my ass off immediately after hanging up. I go to my apartment the next day and see that the sink has spit up everywhere, leaving rusted metal everywhere. I called my landlord and they sent out a plumber. The issue on my end was solved, but nevertheless about a few days later my neighbor texts me saying there's still electrical damage in his apartment from all the water. He wants my insurance to cover it. I told him no, my insurance will not cover it because it only covers damages I caused. I did not cause this problem, he should talk to my landlord. End of story. Never heard from him again, but I never gave him a dime. Saw his mom helping him move stuff, presumably to back to her house. And guys, if you have watched until here and enjoy the crazy neighbor stories, because I certainly do, then please don't forget to like the video and maybe even post some star emojis in the comments if you want to go the extra mile in terms of supporting my channel. Thank you very much in advance, your help is very much appreciated and it helps me a lot. And the next one is titled Bobbin Loom's Revenge on His Crappy Neighbor. I had a crappy neighbor, his property abutted the rear, lol, words right, of mine. He was a bitter old guy who spent his time in his extensive vegetable garden on our property line. An Italian guy, the kind whose homegrown tomatoes probably made his famous red sauce. We were a young family at the time, just the first wave of new people starting to gentrify the working class neighborhood. We had a fixed upper and a baby. We didn't have much money to work with that first summer, so I spent a lot of time in the yard doing my best to landscape the overgrown jungle left by the previous owners. I basically ripped everything out until we had a lawn. We had record rainfall that summer and everyone's property had standing water. That old guy starts screaming at me one day while working out the back. I cannot understand half of it because it is a mix of old man gibberish and Italian. Apparently he was blaming my removable of massive weeds on my property for flooding his garden. It didn't have anything to do with the regular deluges of rain we were getting or that our properties were at the bottom of a hill. Once my attempt at reasoning had worn out, I ignored him, turned up my headphones and went back to work. I was ripping out the last long stretch of weeds and laying grass seed along the rear property line. The next day we get a knock on our door. It is a city inspector asking us to show them the drainage we installed without a permit. I had no idea what they were talking about, so I asked how they knew about it. They claimed they couldn't say, but they wanted to see the rear property line I had worked on yesterday. I simply told them that I had not installed drainage, I had removed weeds and seeds. Pointing out the supposed drainage location, I indicated that no one in their right mind would install drainage there. They agreed and left. The plot curdled slightly. I should mention that this wasn't just me. That old guy had a similar demeanor with his other abutting neighbors. One of them was a hard-drinking carpenter who lived next to me, and he recommended that I just offer to beat the crap out of that guy like he did the last time that old guy complained to him. Apparently, that was the reliable standard in the neighborhood. I, however, was not interested in beating up the old guy, who was clearly all too happy to run to the city with lies. I went about my business until that old guy yelled at my wife and baby while they were alone in the yard one day. My mother was helping at the house and went outside to see what was happening. That old guy screamed at my mother too. Old man spittle, incomprehensible words, surprising volume, shaking jowls, etc. Well, screw him. The old neighborhood may have opted to beat the crap out of that old guy, but he was quite clearly too full of crap for anyone to ever completely beat the crap out of him. I pulled some money from other house projects and I built a fence. It was a gorgeous suburbanite fence. It was made out of resin, a brilliant white, and installed professionally by fencers. It was a perfect white picket fence, the American dream of fencing, a beacon of gentrification hope in the middle of a working class neighborhood of overgrown yards and cars on blocks. I have America boner just thinking about it. Except for that old guy, our shared property line did not get a white picket fence. Our shared property line got an 8-foot tall solid security fence. I watched him that day from my window as that old guy stood in his garden and glared at the workers installing the resin equivalent of the Berlin Wall along our property line and his beloved garden. That old guy may have noticed the temperature dropping because his entire garden was now cast in shadow. I waited at the window most of that day. I watched his garden, I watched him in his garden, I watched him wait for the sun to come back. The sun did not return to his tomatoes. With his gaudy landscaping of cheap waterfalls, ornamental trees and various other tasteless crap and my new fence, his garden no longer had much sun exposure. The weather got colder, the fall and winter passed, and I saw less and less of that old neighbor. I saw him replant the next season, but I rarely saw him outdoors after that year. His garden was meager, according to my view from our second floor. When I started this post left, I told you that I had a crappy neighbor. The following winter I saw someone new in that old guy's yard. I never saw the old neighbor's family, presumably because his attitude towards his neighbors carried over to his family. I greeted the newcomer thinking he had just moved in. It turned out that he was that old neighbor's son and that old guy had deteriorated over the year and had to be moved to a care facility. I'm assuming he died that year because a new family moved in during the summer. I removed the security fencing and replaced it with picket to match the rest of the property. Good fences make good neighbors. And the next one is titled, "My EP neighbor hates me for not seeing her sick kids." My personal conflict with my neighbor Karen, the living definition of an entitled mom, just missing the hair, is that she thinks that having a doctor, me, living nearby means she has access to free checkouts and formulas. I found out about this pretty soon after moving in, and since then I had constantly refused her calls, visits or whatsoever, and only help her in cases of emergency. Normally one of the kids getting a deep cut or the small one having a particularly bad asthma crisis. For her this is not enough, and we have at least 2 clashes per month about me not doing my job for free, ignoring my oath, people love invoking the Hippocratic Oath when they want free things, and blah blah blah. With this intro you can imagine how life has been with the virus around, and it got to its breaking point some nights ago. Apart from the pandemic, my country is in the middle of the rainy season, meaning you can get any other kind of respiratory virus as easily as the COVID virus, if not more, but obviously we always have to think in the worst possibility. 3 days ago Karen came to my door at 7 PM saying her kids were coughing, had a fever of 39 degrees and that the small one, the one with asthma, was wheezing. Without opening the door, I told her she needed to take them to the nearest hospital immediately, but she refused because she didn't want to expose herself or the kids in the ER. She wanted me to see them, verify if they had the virus, she seemed to think I could do that with just a physical examination, and give her a formula for a new inhaler because the usual one was not working on the kid. I said no problem because the kids could have the real virus, small chance but still possible as I know they've been going out a lot and needed to be properly tested. Even if it came out negative, it was obvious her kid would need more than an inhaler for the crisis he was having. There was a lot of bantering between the two of us, which quickly escalated into both shouting and her slamming my door. Thank God it is made of metal and threatening to sue me. I knew this was pointless, so I escaped into my room and put my noise-cancelling headphones on. Who knows how long she was out there shouting at my door, but in the end she took the kids to the ER. As far as I know, the big one is back home, but the small one is hospitalized. I don't know the virus status of neither of them. Gossip goes fast in this neighborhood, and I already found out from some friends that Karen is bad-mouthing me, with many of the other neighbors taking her side. I also told this story to one of my colleagues and he said I should have at least seen the child if he was as bad as she described. I still believe examining the kids without the resources to treat them would have just pointlessly exposed me to a possible positive case, even if I wore the few biosafety clothes I had in my house. I recognize my past story with Karen could be clouding my judgment, but that doesn't mean this woman's entitlement is not on another level. Thanks for reading, guys. And guys, unfortunately we have already reached the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed today's stories, and if you haven't already, please also go to patreon.com/ripeyoutube, where I upload exclusive Reddit videos starting at just $3 a month. This is a great way to support me in case you are interested, and the chance for me to become independent from YouTube revenue. Thank you so much for watching, please don't forget to subscribe and like the video, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.